Well, first of all, when somebody asks you what's your name, they're not asking your name. They're asking how are you called? Because a name is not a label. It's really a description of your character, and it also, in many instances, it'll also tell which crest you're from, and or from the eagle or from the raven side. And so in English, I would say, my name is Woodrow. But in Haida, the first word in a sentence is the most important part of the sentence because I'm telling you who I am. So instead of my name is Kalansana, I am called. Or this person, this person is called Kalansana. So Kalansana, this person is called. So the first word it tells you. So when somebody asks you ask somebody their name in Haida, the first words they say will be their identity, and then this person is called. So Kalansana ihlgiigaa, and Kalan is walking, Sanai is day. That's a person who walks in a room carrying a newborn child. Somebody brings a special day. Well, the first name I got was Kauda Hanas. Kautla means to sit down. Hanas is something ugly to look at. Good looking kid too. Ugly sit down. So the old people call me Kauda Hanas, and the other ones called me ugly sit down. My dad and others called me son. Some people called me by my middle name Friedlander. And one uncle just called me Windy. So when I started school and they called the roll, they got to Woody Morrison Jr., I didn't answer. So they called my name again. And the teacher asked, why aren't you answering? And I said, answering what? Your name. I said, I didn't hear my name. I didn't know that was my name. I was all those other things. The same way with a guy named, we call him Joe Bush, but his name was David Michael Frisbee. And so when they called his name, he didn't answer either. My name's Joe Bush. So we grew up with nicknames, and so we didn't always really know. There were some people, I didn't even know their names until, I was maybe 20 or 30 years old. One of the guys, I don't know which guy it was, he had 6 or 7 kids. He was up to the clinic and asked him, he didn't know, because all he knew was their nicknames. He said that's all he ever used. So nicknames too, everybody sees you differently. And so people have different names for you. Somebody might say, well, you don't look like a Vanessa, you look more like a Daisy, whatever. But in English, they become labels, whereas this is your identity. It tells, in Tlingit, I'm called P.H. Sean. P.H. Sean was my grandfather, but that name was given to me. P.H. is a raven in Tlingit. Sean is an old one. So, but the story tells of a raven that's flying in a circle around a totem, and then the totem falls and lands on the beach on its side. Then the raven fell out of the sky and landed on the beach facing the pole. So this raven will fly until the last pole falls, something like that. So the names are not just, well, there was one guy down in the South Pacific, he was Lakota, I think, but he called himself Drifting Eagle Feather. Maybe, but you can't name yourself because you can't really discover your own character. You can't tickle yourself. You can't doctor yourself because you really can't do a very good diagnosis of yourself. And probably the most important thing that you can't do is lick your own elbow. I know some of you are going to try when I'm not looking. So anyway, Tawansana Hinudi Ka'am. And like I said, the I is like the I in pin. The two U's together are like the double O in moon. In U, and the double I is like EA in being, so it becomes D. And then the K and the Y are kya. Kya is the A is because it's like the U in sun. Kya. Kya. And sometimes that's used as like an expression too. Kya. If people are making a comment on something you're saying. Kya. And the double A is like the A in father. And then the NG is not, well, I was in CIBC Bank, and one of the tellers had the name on there was NG. I said, oh, your name is And the person said, yes. Europeans usually put a vowel in front of it and call it Eng. But it's So in Vietnamese too, they do the same thing. So kya kya the voice goes up
So you said sometimes people use kia in as an expression. What does it mean if you use
Sometimes somebody gives you something and they're a little bit surprised by it, or it's not exactly what they expected. Kya. Or there's a different ones. Club. Do. Things like that. And I think most of them narrowed down to maybe 2 expressions now. Another one we used to use was called oi. Oi. If I threw something and almost hit, I'd say oi. It almost hit, or it almost hit me, oi. So you almost hit the mark. Oi. So there's a lot of, I'll see if I can compile a bunch of them. And so then we can go around and introduce yourself with, speak up.
Vanessa Hinudi Kia Ang.
Kia Ang.
Kia Ang.
There you go. The voice has to go. Kia Ang. Makes it easier to pronounce.
Laurel Inudi Kia Ang.
So your voice went down.
You
Kia
did.
Ang.
Ah.
Kia Ang.
Ah.
Not Kia Ang. Kia Ang is when you're asking a question, the voice goes down.
Well.
Like if I ask you your name, Sinodam Kia Ang. Kia Ang. Now it goes down. But when I'm answering you, it goes Kia Ang. It goes up. So now we know. So give it one more shot.
Laurel Inudi Kia
Hinu.
Ang.
Just say it slowly. Hinu di Kia Ang. Hinu di Kia Ang. So it's the rhythm. Svetlana. Kia Ang. There you go.
call that Hinu di Kiana?
Kia Ang.
Kiana.
And so you separate the sounds.
ihlgiigaa, ihlgiigaa.
Nadine, Inu, Di, Kia.
There you go.
Kunjaduna Deacon.
Huh?
That's how I grew up saying it, Kunjaduna Deacon.
But see, we're just asking if you say it slowly. Yeah, say it slowly so we, because you can't separate out the sounds when you just, people like me have hearing.
Kunjaduna Deacon.
There you go. I hear a lot of people doing that when they're learning to speak. They say it fast like they're speaking English, but there is a rhythm to our language that it also changes how you think when you start using a different rhythm. It's like when you're singing too. If you use one rhythm, you're happy. You sing a different rhythm, you're sad. I almost cried when I was coming into my car. I was listening to Frank Sinatra, 1940 recording, I'll Never Smile Again. Until I smile at you. So anyway, that's how we can start getting to know or get used to introducing yourself when somebody asks you. And also, something else we do to ourselves is, like I said, I went to that workshop on anti-oppression, and one of the things that the oppressor, the colonizer, does is they put labels on us so that we become whatever they identify us as. Indians, natives, aboriginals, First Nations, whatever. The Inuit people said, we're not Eskimos. Eskimos are French word for eaters of raw meat. Well, no, there's on the Canadian side, they're Inuit. You get up to the northern part of Alaska, they speak the same language, but they're Nupiaq. You get a little bit farther, there's another language called Yupik. And so you've got the Central Yupik and Siberian Yupik. And you get a little bit further south, you've got the Alupik, called the Aleuts. And then there's another language called Tsupiaq. So there's a whole lot of them, and they're calling themselves by their own names. And a lot of times, they might say whatever their name is, and then Alaska Native, simply to identify the place where they're from, rather than their identity as a person. Because so this NG sound. So this person is sort of a language group, you know, hot kiss. So that root word hot really refers to us as humans or persons, but it also identifies our language. And so when you ask somebody where they're from with their Samalgit, that also can tell you a little bit about their name and their language. So instead of just saying, I'm First Nations, you know, what is that? Does it have a language? Does it have a country? Does it have a lineage? What is it? No, it's just a generic term. Could be we're canned tomatoes. So it's really important that, well, this is a sound that's really very difficult for everybody to make unless you grow up with it. And I didn't grow up really pronouncing this one because mostly I heard it. But then when it came time for me to reproduce that sound, I had a difficult time with it. But we have another X like that. What's it called? All I hit, kiosk.
Oh, don't.
All I hit, kiosk. All I's a paddle. And here's where your OTL. This is dancing under the paddle.
Oh, well.
And I brought some explanations.
What did that other phrase mean, that hey,
Die hat Abend,
yeah,
I'm Haida.
oh, is that what it's,
Yeah,
You were saying?
the young body is organized. This is my desk. A clean desk, there was a sign of a sick mind. I've got them here in one of these piles.
I like it big.
Thanks.
I have one more red bag somewhere.
There's a baker.
No, there's another one.
Is it?
Let's see, this is it here. No, I had another red bag.
Leave it in the car?
Is it the one that's on the table?
Huh?
No, he was looking at it.
That's your bag.
Yeah.
Leave it in the car?
Oh, nice.
Thank you.
I know this. It was in this bag. See the red on there?
That's what she said, it's on the table.
Yeah. People have to speak up. I'm not. See, ihlgiigaa. Ihlgiigaa means the ears don't work.
Cute.
Q is your ears. Ihlgiigaa. So anyway, that's where this class is going to go, is to doing this dancing under the paddle. And so by way of explanation, I'll just read it out. So I always have trouble spelling what my Chinese name was. I thought it was Kun Koyan, but I've heard others say Kun Koyang. Kun Koyang is a whale that comes out of the water, makes a big splash. Kun is the no-nose or a whale. So this is coming into life. He was a keeper of a ceremony called ihlgiigaa, dancing under the paddle. He performed it in 1940 when it was against the law, so it was done in secret. I was born in 1941, and in 1944 he took me to history keepers, and I was forbidden to talk about training to anyone other than the members of that society. It was called ihlgiigaa. He always remembers what happened way over there. And so, that should be easy for you folks. It only took me 50 years to learn how to say that. Then my Tana went home in 1945. And even now I'm very reluctant to say anything about it because I know how it felt to keep things secret because of fear of government. And I feel some of the same wariness in doing it now. This is what I wrote in 2015. In 1982, when I graduated from law school, I returned to Heidelberg. My uncle Louis Kitcoon sent for me and gave me a new name. And at that time, the ceremony was passed to me, and I asked, when am I supposed to do this? He answered, you will know. In October 2014, an image appeared in front of me, a miniature pool of water, and a small object was dropped in the center of the pool. When I saw the waves radiating out and the words, it's time, it scared me, so I didn't say anything, then decided I had a responsibility to carry out. One of the outcomes of a meeting of timekeepers in Arizona, this new world began in May, the one we're in now. Our world began to change, really, was May 6th of 2013. So I decided to do the ceremony on the first full moon in May. It's supposed to be when the moon is gaining strength. So I got that part a little bit off. So it has to be when the moon is gaining strength. It has to be before the full moon, but after the new moon. It's in that stretch. But there's a solstice in there somewhere. It is said that when that which exists nowhere exists in nothing and brought all things into being or into light, causing human beings also to be brought into being. This is a story that talks about Hanwai, the big spirit in the air. Air is invisible, so it exists nowhere in nothing and brought everything into light. So without light, nothing exists. So we don't have word creator. We don't talk about creation. What we do talk about is transforming. So scientists tell us that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. All we can do is transform it. So I don't know if anybody really knows about those things, but sounds like it could work. And anyway, so Anwai brought everything into light, and there's two aspects of that Supreme Being. One is the intangible, which is the spirit in the air, and this other is tangible, is big spirit in the atmosphere. Anwai. It's so big it fills the entire universe, every corner of the universe, and every fiber of my being. So it isn't somewhere out there. And when you use the word creator or the word God, it brings to mind, usually you're not even aware of it, an image of a male, of a man that's really in charge and somebody you gotta submit to. But ours, it's the thing that brought everything into light. This is the thing that we ask for guidance from rather than protection. It's said that a man faces everything himself, and the moment that he thinks somebody's going to rescue him, he loses because he gave up. So a lot of times when people are praying for somebody to come and bail them out, they've given up. But there is a difference. When you finally have given everything you got, and you can't take one more step, you still got to take another step, but ask for help. Ask for assistance, not for somebody to take over the job. So there's a difference. So anyway, this Hanawai sensed that something was amiss, something was missing, something wasn't in balance. So that's when Anwai manifests itself into this tangible form called Anwai, and it was, we'll say, seated on this new thing called Earth, trying to discover what was not in sync, it wasn't in harmony, and was sort of like doodling, picking up handfuls of earth, trying to discover this, and then became very saddened because it couldn't discover what was missing, and tears of sadness began to fall. And tears clear the mind, so suddenly realized what was missing, and those tears of sadness turned to tears of gladness, and they were falling into that handful of earth. And when it discovered what was missing, there is nothing that was brought into the light that has the capacity to appreciate all of this, the majesty, the beauty, the wonder of it, in order to express that gratitude. So this new one will be given that capacity. And when opened a hand, the soil that was dampened with tears of sadness and tears of gladness held its form. So this first human was molded from that dampened soil. It was perfect. It was female. So the breath of life was put into it. We call it sweet. Sometimes it's called the spitting medicine because of the sound. The only problem is that nothing is made with only one side. So it is separated into two parts, and the second is male. The only requirement for being human is to be born of a woman. So when a woman gives birth to a child, the first sound uttered by that child signals it's now in harmony with the universe. So we call that, that's part of that sweet. that is now in harmony with the universe. Xaad, that's that woman's magic of that harmony. Sui is the woman's power to pierce the heart, to kill or to cure. And so if any of you have seen the movie about Edge of the Knife, where Diane Brown is trying to bring that Xaad back into a state of being human, was doing that, trying to put that humanity back into the spirit of that Xaad. That so only a woman can do that, a man can't do that. So we don't use the word creator because what happened is these elements were transformed into what we are, rather than just snapped out of the air and suddenly we're there. And the way ours tells it is that after that initial bringing into being, it took us a long time to learn to be human, because it wasn't just automatic. So we had to learn to be human. And this went over many, many centuries, I assume, from what I was told. And it tells where it happened. But in the Haida myth, they describe a situation that happened 78,000 years ago. It described a bay that was crescent-shaped. And so when you hear the myth told, Haidas were created on North Beach, on the north end of Haida. But our coming into life happened much earlier, long before there was Haida was really islands, because there was 4 big islands, one sunk and one moved away. And I was rather surprised that in our history it tells the one brother moved away. Well, as it turns out, there's an island over 300 miles north from Haida that the geology is the same as Haida. It's called Bering Island, up where Sitka, Alaska is. So how did they know? And one sunk under the ocean, and so to the northwest of Haida is an underwater volcano. And that is where Raven got fire to give to Puffin, because Raven stole the water from Puffin and didn't have a container, so drank it all, and was coming from Cusco, this island that's called Forster Island in English. But Puffin is a fast fire. Actually, there's some island farther northward that's called Spirit Islands, north of Forster Island. And Raven was pretty heavily laden, full of water, and here come Puffin chasing him, we're going. And so Raven starts spitting out the water to try to lighten his load, but Puffin was still gaining. And they got the north end of what's called Haida Guai. Raven spit out the last of the water from his stomach, and it's brown colored. So the water on the north end of Haida Guai is brown colored. We call it Padu. But Puffin caught Raven, flung him to the ground, and began pummeling him, toughing him about. And Raven said, no, I'll give you like something else. Well, what are you going to give me? I'll give you fire. How are you going to do that? I'll show you. Okay. So went and got a branch, a piece of wood, however long, and then called Hawk. Hawk had a long beak and very good fire. So he smeared pitch on both ends of that stick and told Hawk to put it in his beak and then fly around that volcano until one side ignite, and then to wheel over and go in the opposite direction and light the other side. Well, as Hawk was getting closer and closer, its beak started getting soft and it began to sag. and finally that ignited, so Hawk wheeled around to fly the other way, and the beak bent back. So when you see carvings of Hawk, you'll see the beak is bent back this way. But there was burning on both ends. So Hawk brought it back and gave it to Puffin. And Puffin took the stick that was burning on both ends and headed for home. Like I said, real fast flyer, so it was burning pretty fast. And that's why you see the flame marks on his cheeks right here. So anyway, when we started looking at those things about our history, about where we come from, and we've been here a very, very long time, much longer than people realize. And so that place we stopped where we were 78,000 years ago, we arrived there, who knows, 80,000 years ago. And it describes a large crescent-shaped bay that took, I think it was 4 days.
Did you see that new documentary, 1491, Now It's Time to Tell Our Story?
I saw them advertise it.
Yeah, put it on your page, just.
Yeah, I saw that, but I haven't had a chance to look at it, yeah.
I'm a little disappointed in it. I'm a little disappointed in it
Oh,
because they talk about Bering Strait theory.
oh yeah, they got, I
And
talked
these
to
are
the,
people from SFU and Squamish and saying it's a great idea. But they'll be frozen solid because of what Woody said.
well, I talked to the guy who wrote the book called Bering and something like that. A Japanese guy named Jun Hasakawa. And he was talking about that, how came across that land bridge. And according to our history, it wasn't really a land bridge, the continents were connected. And if you look at the footprints, they were going the other way. Because, see, according to our history, everybody stayed on the coast because they could avoid predators. And also there's food. And some of the animals left because in Haida it's called ihlgiigaa. The atmosphere was always warm, always pleasant. It was tropical. And so when it started to get cold, the camels left and the horses left, and they went across the other way. And there was probably some other animals, so those are the two notable ones, were the horse and the camel, that they found remains of them in the tundra in Alaska.
No way.
But they went the other way. So when you start looking at those, like that big bay, but there's really strange part about the story is it doesn't mention any tides. It talks about how it was shallow, the water wasn't really cold, and how they could wait out and get food, that they seen seabirds eating. But there was rocky outcrops on both ends, and it took maybe 5-6 days to walk from one end to the middle. And people were careful when they went out on those rocks to get things growing on rocks, because there was something called Chans Hanwai. Chans Hanwai would be like a monster in the shallow water. It's sort of like an orca. An orca will come up by an ice floe or something and grab something off. So when people got close, it said it went down real deep, and if they were out there, around there, and they weren't careful, this thing would come up and grab them. It had big teeth, take them off and eat them. But anyway, there was, the people didn't need shelters, but they described trees that were real tall. And the way it was described to me is the branches on it was more shaped kind of round, like an umbrella or like a palm tree. There was no limbs long, but so they dug deep, shallow depressions under the tree, and they put branches, whatever, line it. And if it rained, the rain would run off those things. And if the water level came up, you didn't get wet because those branches would keep you off the ground. And they were kind of territorial about it because they didn't really have much language. So a strange person approached, they would start hissing to warn them off. And it describes a food, it was like a hedge. This hedge was maybe about head tall. I don't know how tall people were then. and it was real thick, and there was something growing in there. It's kind of, I'd say, about the color of a persimmon, but it was shaped more like an eggplant. When they talk about an orchid that's starving, it takes that peanut head because the fat is, it's going so the head's bigger, and well, that's the way this thing was shaped, and it grew in there, and from what I understand, it was a complete food. So people ate a lot of those, and the Mayans tell, and some of the other people in the area tell about the corn spirit, that a bolt of lightning caused the mountain to crack open. It says the corn spirit came out, and that's where we got corn from. And part of our history says that certain things that have been here a long time are going to disappear, and things that have long been gone will reappear. And so they're saying that this thing that was a pretty wide chasm, I guess, at one time is now only about this wide. It's slowly closing. And when it closes, that the corn spirit is going to be gone. And that's when this other one is going to reappear, this other food. So it doesn't leave us hanging.
Back in the Bering Strait days, how likely was it to marry a newcomer? Like, how were the rules back then for?
Well, rules?
I just
what it
figured
was, it says after that cataclysmic explosion that happened 78,000 years ago, well, people were moving before then, but they were just following food. And the way they did it is they strung out a long line as they moved across the land. If somebody found something over there, they would send a message, we found something. So they would move, and gradually they spread farther and farther. And according to what these old ones, these ones who remember everything, said that people start getting so far apart, they start looking different because the sun is different in different places, so you had different colors. You start changing like that. And then when we got to what's now Arctic, the Arctic, and people start moving down the land, I think the people from South America moved first. I mean, they were there first. That's just a guess. But anyway, it says that this is when we became people, because we start forming together social groups and begin developing our own languages. And so it said, the way it was described, as each people came into being, they were put on a land that looked like them and given a language that sounded like that land. It described that land and all the beings there, and were given ceremonies on how to maintain the balance of all the things of that place. So that's when we became people. And the first, I'll say, settlement that I ever heard of was called Sagwa-Kwan Langai. Sagwa-Kwan Langai, I was north of what's on the north end of now what is Prince Wales Island. But Sagwa-Kwan just means the north end of the land, of the island. Langai is just a big camp. There was no need really for big structures because it was warm all the time. So it was more like the South Pacific. You had shelters. But then when the climate began to change, it started to get cold, so people started moving. And it tells about how when people moved from what's now, we'll say, southeastern Alaska and moved across what is called Dixon Entrance, if the water was very low, there was the tidal sand and tidal pools. And then there was a warming period when it warmed up again. And we call it the Sheets Blue.
Just didn't find a bag here with phones and stuff. Anybody? There's a lot of money worth of phones. Someone might have seen it or picked it up.
Sorry.
No,
What does they look like?
Actually,
it's a black bag, but brand new iPhones. My girlfriend, my buddy.
Did you?
it was empty when we came in here because they rented out the tables and chairs, so everything was gone.
So did you find one or?
No.
No.
Oh, yeah, that's what it
We're
looked like.
videotaping right now.
Oh,
So
yeah,
you're
well,
gonna
it
be
should
on
be up
video
there.
because you got permission to be in here.
Yeah, I do have permission, I have a right to walk in.
Yeah,
Yeah,
check,
that the sign on the window says you're being
Oh, I
videotaped.
didn't see it, so I didn't read it, I can't.
well, check
Sorry,
at
you
the
don't have your
desk.
bag.
Yeah, check at the desk, they might have found it.
He's been going around for a little while.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's all right. Anyway, so Gitlitsklu is, sometimes it's called a myth time, but that's when the flood happened. It warmed up and the ice melted and flooded the area, and then it got cold again. And so that was 5 cycles ago when it started. Waskwa, Hagria, and Congo was when we first got to that place where the volcano exploded, and then Wash, Hagri was the time of the ice, but Gitlitsklu was the time in between, the myth time, when the tide came in. And so as the climate began to change, everybody started to move south. And when they came along the coast, there was strings of islands, and the last people that came across, we called cloak people. And today they call themselves Waitaha. They're in New Zealand. But they tell that same history. They talk about, and I think the Eries talked about it too, the ones from around New York area, or the Mohawks, the Six Nations, that there was places where when they'd moved from one island to the next, water was deep, so they had some form of rope that one person would swim across and fasten it, and then the others would go along that thing to get across. And that's how they moved from island to island along the coast. And you couldn't go inland because of the mountains as you start getting down along the Gulf of Alaska. But since it was warm all the time, life wasn't too bad, and food was easy to get because you didn't have to hunt animals. You could get stuff off the beach and all the rest. So that's what our history says. And then from Shagwa Kwan, Lanai, they said they could see the ice. They didn't know what it was. This black mountain was growing. It was coming and growing, getting bigger and bigger. And the wind that came from that thing was real cold, real dry. And they were wondering what it was. So a party of men went to take a look. And I was talking to some glaciologists about it. And they were looking around caves here in Southeast Alaska and Prince Wales Island area. And so I told them that when they couldn't get close because the wind was too strong. And this one glaciologist said, well, when you have an ice mass that's 3 kilometers high, the cold air just flowing down from it, by the time it reached ground level, you're doing maybe 200 miles an hour. So you couldn't get close. So I asked, well, what's that do to your theory then about people coming down through an ice-free corridor? And one guy's face got red. He said, we didn't think about that. He would have had 4,000-mile wind tunnel. There'd be very little moisture. There'd be almost no food, if there was any. So they didn't go that way. The only ones that I ever heard a story was from the Northern Cheyenne Indians. They came that way. But this is after most of the ice was gone. But it wasn't during the period when the first ones got down this far south. So when people kept going south, when it got colder and colder, some stayed, like roughly from Bella Bella down along the coast. We call them Gituyas, I think is how it's called. They're the children or the descendants of the ones who stayed when the ice came. So they've been here, I don't know, 50, 60,000 years. And then the interior Salish and Dene-speaking people, they went all the way south. And we just call them Tzak. Tzak is a Dene word for eagle, bald eagle. Because, see, we didn't have eagles here. We had what was called an colchis, the black-skinned one. And it described the wingspan as, well, wingspan about 25 feet across. It lived in the high places, and when it got cold, it left, and it hasn't been seen for many generations. So when the people, the Dene-speaking people, came north, that bald eagle also came north, and it took a while for it to get out to our islands. So we didn't have a name for it, so we used the Dene word, Xaad. And then some people used the word hilt. Hilt is the immature one, when the feathers are mottled brown and white color, and then when the head and the tail feathers turn white, that's when we call it Xaad. So the people from Alaska, interior Alaska, called Athabascan, they speak almost the same as the Navajos. And the Apaches speak, and the Tlingit speaking people, they speak almost exactly the same. But it's all the same language all the way down. So they're all the Eagle people. And one Tlingit man, Tanawak, he was chief of the Sockeye House. He said they went all the way to South America. So when we start taking a look at that and start looking at who we are and start taking a look at our identity, this ceremony about dancing under the paddle goes back to that very beginning of when that first woman gave birth to that child, the first child. And so in this ceremony, the women dancers will be the first woman. Each one will be the first woman. And you ask, well, what does she bring with her? She can bring anger, hate, discontentment, ugliness. No. She doesn't bring any of that baggage with her. This is the beginning. This is where she's carrying the seeds of our future humanity.
So do we walk in like Vanessa Hudgens did on Live with Kelly and Ryan? Just everything is so sparkly. Like,
actually, you have to, I think it's called having great calm and presence. You are the first one. You are representing I wrote it up in one of these things here, how it describes that first woman. We're not mankind.
the second page, that be aware that it's not about her, yet it is everything about her.
Good question.
It's not about you, but it's everything about you. It's really just, it's what you represent.
What you represent, yeah, I was just gonna say that.
So it's what I wrote in there. Each of the women dancers must be aware that this is not about her, yet it's everything about her. Each represents the first woman. What does she bring into the world? Anger, hurt, guilt, hate, etc.? No. For this brief moment, she brings the awareness of being human, the awareness of carrying not only the seeds of human survival, but also the mindset that will instill in us and those yet to come a sense of completeness, of happiness, trust, sharing, and a knowledge that all of creation are relatives and not simply things. All humans share a beginning in common. None is superior. The men singers and dancers too. Each must leave his ego at the door, for this is not about him, yet it is everything about him. He represents the first man. He has an obligation as the human male to protect the one carrying the seeds of our future. He has an absolute responsibility to protect, provide for, and to walk beside her through a world often fraught with danger, and to ensure no one interferes in her quest for her own special place in the universe. Each human is a unique creation and must be treated as such. The woman has feelings, hopes, aspirations, dreams, and as human deserves to be treated as such. As she walks through this life, she has dreams, needs, wishes, etc., and it is my responsibility to not interfere in her search for her own special place and to ensure others do not interfere in that quest. That which brought us all into light is beyond all our understanding, so instead of simply worshipping it, or trying to determine its essence or its plan, we live our lives with a certain knowledge that we are not in control. When we sing our songs, they are a form of prayer, for we're expressing our relationship with our relatives in the natural world. Each time a new child arrives and cries for the first time, it is the first human, a unique creation, and with that first cry, it brings that one into harmony with the universe. Protect and nurture it, for each newborn is the first human, and all our treatment of the new being will determine our human destiny. So it's pretty heavy responsibility, but that was what was taken for granted until the colonizers came in and changed everything. In fact, the basis of our culture you hear people say low man on a totem pole, when in reality that's as far from being correct as you can get. It said that frontal pole in front of the house with the doorway, that doorway represents a woman's privates, because this is where all life comes out. Life is to be lived out here, not inside the house. So that's where life comes out. And the person who will say owns the house commissions a pole to be raised, to be carved, and at the top would be his crest and that of his uncle that he inherited from, and then the other uncle that that one inherited from, and so on, until it gets to the bottom figure, and that's the crest of the wife of the person who commissioned the pole. And when it's completed, they dig a hole, they stand it up. It's called Ga'an. Ga'an. Now your history is standing straight up. That woman's feet's in the water, her body's in the land, her upper torso's in the air. So what it represents is that female energy ties together water, earth, and sky. Her husband's family's balanced on her shoulders. If she loses her balance, it all falls. So not only does that female energy tie together water, earth, and sky, but the balance of the cosmos is entirely dependent upon the strength and stability of that female energy. So that's the whole basis. That's why if a man abused his wife, he could end up being ground for it. Usually there was a few stages. The first time she'd tell her brothers, they'd come talk to him. And I handed out some pages as to who is your mother. It's not just my biological mother, it's her sisters too, and all the women of her crest, of her generation. So I got a whole lot of mothers, and all the children, my brothers and sisters. So this woman would have a whole lot of brothers. They come and talk to me for being mean to my wife. If I did it again, they come back. And this time, they use more than strong words. Put a hurt on me. How does it say that, Russell Peters? Gonna put a big hurt on you. If I did it again, they would stop short of crippling me. If I did it again, they go to the clan chief and get permission to drown me. Because a tribe is sort of like living inside of a beehive. Everybody, the whole life is focused on making sure the community survives. And for the community to survive, the individuals have to survive. But if you get a hornet in here, they're going to get rid of it. So if you have somebody in the house, say we're all living in this house, and you get an argument with you, and then he takes your side and I take her side, and you got a war going on. But if one of you brushes against the other, and the person says, you hurt my feelings, you deal with it right then. You don't let it build up. You don't go around getting people to side with you and picking fights, but you deal with it when it happens. That's why they say that the past is in front of me. I can see everything that's from here to Todd G, that's the when we come over the horizon into light. But the future's behind me, I can't see it. When it comes into sight, I deal with it. Sometimes something hits me in the face, and say it's some kind of unpleasant experience tonight. If I just put it behind me, it hit me in the face again. So when that person does something that hits me in the face, I got to see where it fits in and then talk to that person rather than let it build up. So we didn't have all, Europeans have written histories and anthropologists about the internecine wars, fights within tribes. Of course there's always going to be some sort of conflict, but you get into too many fights, you wipe yourself out. Or if you do like it says in the Bible, that Mosaic law, whatever they call it, of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, you end up with a toothless, blind world.
Do you think they had more potlatches than wars?
Well, there were many ways of settling differences. In Haida, we call it Watslaw, or actually it's just called giveaway. But the word potlatch came from the Chinook language. The Chinook people from up the Columbia River, very peaceful people. They lived almost entirely from fish from the Columbia River. They weren't really hunters, because when you start hunting, that's when you learn how to kill humans too. You learn about war. So when the tribes were traveling anywhere, they would stop in there, and there was always a big feast. And so, since so many of them were around there, they started developing another language, a trading language. And it developed there. And if you went in and attacked them for some reason, you're going to have all the other tribes on your neck. Because, this is where the trading took place, and the language my grandparents and some of the old ones at home used to speak that language. It's really a nice sounding language. I never learned any of it, except certain words like skookum. But Skookum was a jail, a strong house. But Skookum Chuck, strong, tight. So they started using it when in Haida it's called Jutsik. Jutsik is where the tide flows real fast rather than it being strong. It flows fast. But yeah, a lot of the disagreements too were settled by that tlahal, that bone game. I don't know exactly how that worked, but that was used for settling differences. And there were different kinds of, we'll say, potlatch. There was five different ones, I think. One was called picking myself up. Like if I was walking along and I tripped and you caught me before I fell down, then I have to put up a giveaway to repay you, to pay you for that service you provided. So I got to pick myself up now. So there was always recognition of what people did for each other. So it wasn't just paying somebody something, It was actually holding people up. In fact, there was a lawyer, he was a Tlingit lawyer, got his law degree in the 1930s. And he was sort of one of my mentors. And one day he told me, he said, Woodrow, you Haidas, nobody hates like a Haida. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, your grandfather waited almost 30 years to get even with me. I said, for what? He said, well, I insulted him in public. I said, did he say anything? And he said, no. And I said, you just don't understand what he did. We were told if somebody hits me, hurts me, I have a choice. Do I hit him back so hard they never do it again? Or do I wait and own him? Because if I wait, I know that at some time that person's going to be right in front of me where I can either hit him back or I can own him. And so my grandfather chose, rather than to own you, was to hit you back. Because he could have done it the other way. And I told him about these guys that were gonna kill me. And somebody else came along, and of course I'm still breathing. Well, 3 of them were unrepentant, I'll put it that way, and one was sort of embarrassed by it. And so this relative this Tlingit relative was going to take care of it, and I said, no, leave the one to me. And so I just waited. I don't know how many years I waited, 5, 6 years. And the person lost their job and came in where we were having a meeting. And I said, I hear you lost your job. He said, yeah, what about it? I said, I'm really happy to hear that, because we need you here. It's a debt that can't be repaid. Instead of making him small, made him look bigger. And people didn't have to know our history at all to know that I'd elevate this person, even though that person put me down. So this is what my grandfather could have done to that person. So there's a lot of ways in which you settle differences. But when you call it a conflict, that's what you got. But if you can call it an imbalance, then
you wrote an article yesterday on Facebook. They toxic masculinity.
yeah.
I didn't read it fully. Could you bring it up again? I didn't read it fully.
Oh, about masculinity, about that it's beginning to be discussed more and more.
Toxic
Huh? Toxic masculinity? I didn't write that, did I?
Well, you wrote something about masculinity is coming up more and more.
Oh yeah, it's becoming more and more discussed. One of the problems we have, if you read all these novels and whatever about what happens, we'll say, in the industrialized world, it's always wars, always killing, and rape was one of the benefits that went to the winning side. And so there's always treachery and all these things. So the model that we have for masculinity, I tell people it involves 3 elements: genitals, muscles, and attitude. But where are the feelings? In working with families and working with fathers, start noticing things. Like sometimes I'll be sitting in a coffee shop somewhere and I see a man walking down the street with maybe 1 or 2 small children. And the kids will run up to grab their dad's hand, and the man will pull his hand away. I assume that's the father. We'll catch you later. And I see fathers will be sitting with child, not even talking to him. Sometimes even facing away, and the child is trying to talk to him. And because some males have the view, I guess, that that's not manly to be walking around holding your kids' hands. The fathers that come to our Strengthening Fathers program, I ask them, what does a man do? You know, they change their dirty diapers, they cook for the kids, they take them to school, they do all these things that you'd ordinarily assume that the mother's doing. Well, they're a parent, and they're parenting. So it doesn't matter, are you the mother or the father? These children need to be taken care of. Like it says, each one of them is a unique creation. And it needs to learn, because when it comes into this world, its whole universe explodes. There's nothing familiar, but there's some parts of the brain that cause it to do certain things. But one of the things too is this attachment. So it's said in Haida that a newborn child should never be out of the sound of another heartbeat. And we have a thing called the sudden death syndrome, where a child will suddenly just die. It's said that when a child is first born, that its spirit is only very loosely attached, and it can leave at any time. So if it's out of the sound of another heartbeat, there's nothing to hold it there, and it could leave. So some parents, they'll put a monitor, put the baby in another room, a monitor, so they can hear the baby, but the baby can't hear them, because they don't want it to, affect their sleeping. In the same way with drugs and alcohol, Ganil Hanwai, the magic of medicine of confusion. This is where your spirit house is right here. It's not your kook. Kook is the muscle, heart. But this one here is where your feelings really are. And they said it's not your brain, because when you get happy or excited, you can't feel your brain jumping around, but you can feel your heart. So anyway, something else I've seen fathers do that come to our Fathers program, I've seen them sing to their kids, hold them up to their face and talk to them. I saw one father that never smiled, and this child was less than a year old. And the child was always just staring at father, and sometimes would smile, no response. So I said to the father, I said, "You want to see something?" He said, "What?" And I said, "You want to see something that really startled your child without scaring him? I don't think it'll scare him." He said, "What?" I said, "Just smile at him." Smile. Boy, that kid just came alive. As soon as the dad smiled, that's all he had to do, just smile.
Geez, and you had to tell him.
Yeah, so kids imitate everything. So if you're busy on your phone, put that thing away. They're going to copy you. and so this whole thing with masculinity in Haida, it says if I'm to become a man, I learned from water. Water is the most powerful of all my relatives, yet the most humble. It always seeks the lowest point. Water always travels with a song. If there's an opening to be found, water will find it. When it's making noise, be aware, because that's when it's demonstrating its power. So if I'm to become a man, I have to be kind and gentle to the weaker ones and to my sisters. I have to have my own song. And what that means is I have to be perceptive enough to be able to see the rhythm of life, and I can fit myself into it. Sort of like double Dutch jump rope. If you don't watch the rhythm of it, you can get whacked. You're upside the head or getting feet swept out from under you. So if you have your own song, you can fit into life, because life isn't going to change its rhythm for you.
I'm curious, so women are very closely associated with the babies and the boy babies. So what influence do the women have in the child's upbringing that would have them turn out to be, violent and non-caring and that
Well,
sort
see,
of thing?
that's what I'm getting to.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. And also, the man has to be ever seeking, like that water is always going to find an opening or a way to get around an obstacle. So instead of waiting for somebody to fix something, you see if you can figure it out. And so that's what it is, always trying to find solutions rather than spend all their time talking about problems. And then the final part of it is like, for example, if I'm faced with an opponent, an enemy, whatever, if I'm quiet and still like that water, that one will know not to cause me to make noise because he might not survive. And I've used that a couple of times. Just an example, where I work, there were a couple of young guys, probably in their late 20s, both been drinking, they're both about over 6 foot tall. And one left and the other was sort of browbeating the receptionist. And so I walked out to see what's going on. He was standing there. And so I said to him, I pointed at the clock, I said at 4:30 that door gets locked. And immediately, well, who the hell are you? So I told my name. Well, what do you do? I said, I'm a family support elder. Well, what's that supposed to mean? I said, quite obviously, nobody's told you about elders. He said, what are you gonna do? You gonna throw me out? So I said, time to leave. And he said, kind of went like this. And then he left. Well, there's something wrong with this picture. Here's this guy in his late 20s, big husky guy. Here's this gray-haired guy in his 70s standing there looking at me, not showing any fear. He isn't attacking me, he isn't cussing at me, he's not being aggressive, he's just holding his ground. And so he left. And that's what they mean about you don't want to cause it to make noise because you might not survive. But so that's all part of too. We're told never to say I'm better than or just as good as anybody. Nobody's better than me. I don't have to prove it. I just hold my ground. I watched a documentary yesterday from 1980 called Dancing Around the Table. It's when they were negotiating or trying to negotiate with Trudeau and Bill Bennett and those people. And I listened to one man that really impressed me. Well, I knew him for a long time. A guy named James Cosnell, his class. He wasn't asking for anything. He's saying, that is my land. You have no right to it. And then some others were asking to get it back because we want to get a piece of the action, economic development type thing. So when you hear that, but we have to hold our ground. But it's almost saying, well, I'm just as good as you are. I should be able to make money off you too. James Cosnell was saying nobody's better than us. This is our place. And so that's what we have to do. And so when I finished a few years of being in institutions, government schools, and then 4 years in the Navy, I hated everything and everybody. I was always getting in physical conflict. I was drinking, and I severely injured somebody, another guy. And I had to get sewed up too because I got punched right in the glasses. But anyway, I was sitting thinking about it the next day, and I thought to myself, I'll probably kill the next one. How do I make this stop? And the only clues I had was from a man named Sam Douglas. One or two of his nephews drowned. They found the body of one but not the other. And at the memorial feast, Sam was saying the highest compliment you can give any person is say, that's a kind person. He said, that's how my nephew was, just like his old man. He was a kind man, good enough to know. And so I was trying to figure out how do I become kind. I knew I couldn't do it being a Christian. But I didn't figure it out. That was 1979. I didn't figure it out until about 1990. 2 weeks before my second wife filed for divorce. She was having a nap on a sofa and I walked in. I saw her asleep there. And I thought to myself, how vulnerable she looks. How vulnerable she is. How easy it is for me to hurt her, but why do I want to do that? She has hopes. The same stuff I wrote in here. Hopes, dreams. And then I understood what Sam meant when he says, good enough to know. Soft mind. That means I care what that person's feelings are. And that's what the women are going to be teaching us boys.
Okay.
Is to develop those kinds of feelings where I care about the other person's feelings. So we boys and girls played games together. We weren't separated until we got through puberty. So I had to wash dishes, but I didn't do any cooking, cause I got 5 sisters. So I was out of doors all the time,
Ah,
but, there were 7 kids, and, so it took me a while to learn that. And so this is what we learned from our mothers. But something else, and I've had people disagree with me on it, but that's fine, is quite often the mother's the one that's really doing the disciplining. And when a mother says to her daughter, no, it means no. But guys tend to whine. They start whining and whatever, so no becomes maybe. And so as they get older, they start believing that when a woman says no, it means maybe. And the words that alcoholics and drug addicts can't tolerate is the word no. To go. So we tell the parents, in your communications with your children and with each other, be clear, say what you mean, and mean what you say. And that's sort of like the 4 agreements or 4 promises, something where your words should be impeccable. You make, in other words, time to show up here, we start at 10 o'clock or 10:30. Your word is impeccable, so you show up at that time, not some other time. So anyway, those are the things that women's role is also to take some of that aggression out. The other part of it too is when I was about 7 or 8 years old, we were on our way back from the fishing ground trolling for salmon, and we'd been at a fish packer where they sold beer. So my dad was drinking at a 48-foot boat, and we started for home, and he laid down in the bunk and I was steering. And there's islands and reefs and all kinds of stuff. And there were 2 boats ahead of us, the Nomad and the Robert A. And one was Haida from Kasan, Dexter Wallace, and the other one was my dad's cousin, Fred George Jr. So as we got up close to them, they were waving. And I said, Dad, we're passing them. He's laying in the bunk there. And they want us to come alongside them. And so he got him and he looked and he says, okay, we'll go. So he pulled over and they slowed down and we went alongside the Nomad. So we had the largest boat and the Nomad, and the Robert A was smaller. So 3 of us were traveling together. And Dad and the rest of them were all drinking on the Nomad, which was in the middle. And I went over to the Robert A and I had some food. Then as I went back over to get on our boat, we were going around this point and a rope, a mooring line broke. And so the bows parted this way and then it broke the other one. So now the boat was going by itself. There's nobody aboard. And I was standing there watching it and it hit an island. And it bounced up on rock and I started crying. And they cut the lines loose and 2 boats were chasing, but they couldn't catch it. And I was standing there crying. And my dad said something about, now's not the time to cry. First we figure out what happened. Then we cry about it after a while, but now we'll figure out what we got to do. Then you could cry real hard.
I tell them to my grandkids, I got no time for this, we'll figure it out right now, but then we're gonna cry about it later.
Yeah.
But it's gotta be worth my time too.
Yeah, so that's what a man would be teaching his son or his nephew, instead of just reacting and giving up. So, this toxic masculinity is causing so many problems. All the beatings and the stuff that's happening to women, and the children are being abused and brutalized by the same thing too. That Bob?
Next class, Friday, 16th, we'll be doing Haida song.